Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first installment of my card review for Showdown in the Badlands. I did want to start off this with talking a little bit, very briefly, about the upcoming balance changes because both of these are obviously on the mind of Hearthstone players right now. I've actually not been playing and streaming that much Hearthstone since the most recent set of balance changes. Didn't really do much to keep Druid from kind of overwhelming the format. But this most recent set of changes, I think, is much stronger, much better. And I'm pretty happy about it. For those who don't know what the changes are going to be, both Embrace of Nature and Rake are being increased from 1 to 2 mana. I think this is a very good change because both of these are just inordinately efficient. Rake was basically like a multi-strike that was a card that got nerfed ages ago in Demon Hunter, that you didn't even take damage from the first hit and helped enable Spread the Word, which is an incredibly efficient card draw tool for those Druid decks. I think that Rake is a card that was powerful for decks that are actually using their hero power. Fine, looking to buff it up and everything. But just as a incredibly efficient removal spell that also empowers other stuff, I think it was just too good in too many different decks. So I'm happy to see that nerfed as well. And then also the sort of package of both Prison Breaker and Yogg are both getting nerfed. Prison Breaker in a very straightforward way, the damage being reduced from 3 to 2, and Yogg in a much more roundabout way, basically entirely redesigned. The abilities are the same, except the cost is now a static 9 instead of 15 reduced by spells you play. And it casts 2 spells whenever you use an ability. I like this design for Yogg a lot more because it feels much more Yogg-like. The previous one just kind of only felt like Yogg in the way that Yogg also cared about spells. And this one kind of has that random element to it that I think is fun and shouldn't be, able to just come online absolutely ridiculously quickly for classes like Rogue and Druid that are able to cast a ton of cheap spells very, very quickly. I think that both Prison Breaker and Yogg kind of had the same problem, which is that they were basically only really super effectively usable in the classes that have a bunch of cheap spells. Again, Druid and Rogue. You saw some Prison Breaker in like Hunter, and maybe you would see it in like some Shaman decks as well, but it was just absolutely at its best in the classes with like a bunch of 0 and 1 cost cards that often also drew cards. So I like this a lot better. I do think that obviously Yogg going from like this incredibly powerful card to a card which is not even clearly going to be good is a little bit awkward. And obviously having a complete redesign feels weird, but I do think that Standard will likely be in a better place as a result. The other changes coming, Tony is being redesigned so that it no longer swaps your deck with your opponent. It replaces your deck with your opponent's deck, a copy of your opponent's deck, which changes the way the dynamic of the card quite a bit. Now it can be like kind of like an Archbishop Benedictus that allows you to basically, or like an Archivist Elysiana that allows you to like play a longer game if you draw through your own deck. It's not quite like Elysiana because you can't just use it to get ahead in fatigue from your opponent. It basically sets you to the same fatigue point. And as a result, there was still the change to Jailer. Jailer will still destroy your deck, but no longer gives everything else immune for the rest of the game. It's just immune itself. And I like the Tony change because I think Tony is still a cool card that has its own applications. I think new Jailer is just bad. I think it's just a really bad card that has basically no gameplay applications, and I really wish that at least did something that was worth like destroying your deck for. I'd love to see it at least maybe like give itself and the creatures you currently have immune or something. But I think it's more important that it's not like abusive and just basically used to ruin your opponent's deck or make all your stuff immune forever, and then you replace your deck with their deck with Tony, kind of like you did before in a kind of a different way. But anyway, overall, I'm excited to be able to play with cards from the new set and be, stoked for them rather than being like, oh, it doesn't matter because they'll all just like all my creatures will die to Prison Breaker and Yogg and it won't be fun. But instead, I am hyped for Showdown in the Badlands. The overall theme, the sort of westernish theme, it's pretty funny to me that there's what is it? Outlaws of Thunder Junction is a Magic set that's also sort of Wild West themed, and then Magic has a murder mystery set that's coming out that's very similar to Murder at Castle Nathria. It's just very funny seeing the kind of parallel development in like the two major card games that I play. But I really like the overall like feel of Showdown in the Badlands. The mechanics seem pretty sweet. Excavate, getting treasures, which I'll pull up right now. What that means, these are the treasures that you can excavate. There's gonna be a number of cards that will excavate. And what excavate does is you get a treasure of increasing rarity as you excavate further. So the first time you excavate, you get one of the top row. The second time you excavate, you get one of the middle row. And the third time you excavate, you get one from the bottom row. Some classes have the ability to excavate for legendary treasures, so they can excavate a fourth time and get even higher quality thing. Otherwise, you just go back to the beginning. But I think it's really cool. It creates one of my favorite things in Hearthstone, which is just dynamic gameplay that shifts as different things happen in the game, and the ability to try to make a new game plan with new cards that you discovered, which is why Discover is my favorite card game mechanic of all time. But it also includes some of my favorite names, like the Ogre Fist Boulder, the location that turns a minion into a 6/7. It's just beautiful. I love it. But overall, I think there's a lot of just like cool dynamic gameplay that can emerge from these. And there are also lots of cards that have synergies with them, which we're going to get into right now because we are starting with Death Knight. So, our first card that is not a treasure, boom! Fistful of Corpses. It's a 1-cost spell that is both unholy and blood that deals damage to a minion equal to your corpses. There's a ton of removal in Death Knight, especially in blood. So this doesn't really stand out necessarily because like, oh, they really needed removal, but it is super efficient. One is obviously the cheapest you get outside of 0 in Hearthstone. And being able to like tempo remove things can be a very, very valuable tool for decks that generate lots of corpses and don't necessarily have major ways to spend them. Decks like, say, the Climactic Necrotic Explosion, the sort of rainbow style deck, one of the things that I found when I was playing a version of that for a while was that I would frequently build up a lot of corpses, not really have that much to do with them, and fall behind on tempo in a lot of cases. But that's a deck that could very easily use this. You build up a bunch of corpses and being able to play out your stuff that maybe takes a little bit longer, but just able to cheaply remove things. Whether it's something very early in the game that you're just like, you played a body bagger, they played a guy, you're like, okay, kill it, or in the mid game, maybe you've accumulated like 5 to 10 corpses and you kill their big guy and get a significant tempo advantage. It's very, very akin to like the Light It Burns in Priest, but without the essentially like you have to have a high power targeting restriction. So I think that while obviously this isn't a unique effect that Death Knight does not already have tons of removal, as I mentioned, efficient removal like at this level, is something that you really can't dismiss. And I think that this is a card that is very likely to find a home, in these kind of multi-rune style decks if they do become viable for other reasons as well. Next up, we have, speaking of excavate cards, Pile of Bones. So this is a 2-cost 2/1 with Death Rattle. The next time you excavate, resummon this. So I talked a bit about excavate synergies, and this is basically a 2/1 for 1 that will just keep coming back when you dig it up, which is both, I think, very powerful in a lot of circumstances. If there's any kind of deck that's trying to play control, you're excavating, you're both generating additional resources with the excavate cards themselves, as well as just getting a pile of bones back. And it's also just hilarious that you just keep digging up this pile of bones every time you go dig up other stuff. This is like like A+ flavor on this one, and also I think very strong utility in metagames where there is like a reasonable amount of like minion to minion combat slash any kind of attrition that matters. If the metagame is one that is very like burst damage combo oriented, or if like a minion of this size is unlikely to have any real impact, this is probably not a card that's like particularly relevant against like say Mage, because they can always ping it down and it doesn't really tax their resources in a meaningful way. But yeah, I think this is just a very, very cool card. You could potentially like try and copy this somehow and get like a board full of bones that your opponent can like never permanently kill because you keep excavating. And it's not something that just like endlessly comes back. You can't like board lock yourself with it or anything, right? Because you have to excavate to bring it back. So it's kind of self-contained by the number of excavate cards that you both have in your deck and choose to play. But Death Knight has some more excavate stuff, like not this one, but this is a cool card. Cool card too. We'll get to the other excavate stuff in a second, but I thought this was the other spell when I clicked on it, but it's not. Anyway, crop rotation. Speaking of things to build up corpses. 3 cost, summon 4 1/1 undead with rush that die at the end of the turn. So we've seen like the summon rush guys quite a bit in Demon Hunter that never really got off the ground outside of like expendable performers because it just did so many. This one in Death Knight is not necessarily in fact that they have a ton of in terms of just getting like immediate like rush dudes, but also they have corpses. They care a lot about getting just the bodies. So this, summons 4 guys that will build up corpses for you very, very quickly, as well as potentially just clear off your opponent's board. There's lots of applications for this. When we saw the raunchy animation for it, you saw it played into secrets, right? Like this is actually excellent into a lot of hunter cards like Awakened Tremors and just a lot of various dudes. It's not so good if you just cast it and there's like a hidden meaning or a cat trick like in the raunchy animation. But being able to like clear off your opponent's stuff, it's very similar to like a schooling in terms of like the immediate application of being able to do a bunch of damage. You can't parse it out over multiple turns quite like you can with schooling, but it is cheaper to get all the stuff out there, and you have again the use of corpses, which is a very major resource that you care about, and there's a lot of good spending opportunities for corpses as well, like this one. Corpse Farm, a 3-cost spell. Spend up to 8 corpses to summon a random minion of that cost. So if you do manage to get a bunch of corpses early, like from, say, the card we just looked at, or like Plagued Grain that gives you a bunch of corpses, this can just get you a big minion very quickly. Being able to get, a random 8-drop, say, on turn 4 or 5 can be quite powerful, especially if you're not just like spewing those corpses. The things that are getting those corpses, you're getting any kind of value out of them. This can just be extremely powerful there. It's also, it's a lot more efficient than like Corpse Bride. That was a 5-cost thing that summoned used corpses to get like a minion with stats equal to that. And it's fine, right? Like that was a okay spender in something like a Climactic Necrotic Explosion deck, but just a no ability 10/10, for instance, or a no ability 8/8 is very frequently going to be worse than a 8-cost minion or a 10-cost minion, because you get additional abilities, right? Like say you hit a Tyrion who is now buffed to be 8/8 at 8 cost, or some other powerful thing. Obviously, it could be worse. You can get major low rolls and such, but I do feel like the net value of a X cost minion is generally better than an XX minion. But yeah, overall, I think this is quite a powerful card that gives you the ability to actually have like really, really impactful things to spend a boatload of corpses on for not that much mana. All right, here's more of our excavation stuff. Skeleton Crew. Battlecry, excavate a treasure. It costs 0. So one of the things that's interesting about this is that, if we want to take a quick look again at our treasures, this is a card that is a stronger effect the deeper you dig, right? Because the first tier of treasures all cost 1. The second tier of treasures all cost 2. The third tier of treasures costing 3 means that Skeleton Crew is at its best if you excavate on the third tier. So, that gives you some, not only like, hey, what do I do with this sort of card that I got, but how do I decide to play out my excavate cards, right? It gives you this additional layer of decision making that I think is quite interesting, of trying to sequence your excavate effects such that Skeleton Crew is specifically going to get you a higher tier one. Next up, we have Ma and Pa. So this one is an incredible card. I love this card. A 4-cost 1/8. At the end of your turn, gain 5 corpses. At the start of your turn, spend 5 corpses to give your hero +5 health. So this is a very, very interesting card. Obviously, it's very easy for people to attack into it with minions and kill it without those minions actually dying, because it has 1 attack, but it has 8 health. So it's very difficult for someone to actually kill this before you get the trigger off of it. And this is, say you wanted to play something like Climactic Necrotic Explosion. This is something that is both a corpse generator and a corpse spender. And that's a really big deal. You're always going to get the corpses off of it because you get to the end of your turn. And if you could potentially, I can't really think of, I guess there are things like the Death Rattle Taunt minion that could spend your corpses through the your opponent's turn. So there is the possibility that, like, say you played the Yurmgar Deathbringer or whatever on turn 3, they don't kill it, you play Ma and Pa, you get the corpses, they kill that, and you don't have the corpses to spend for Ma and Pa at the start of your turn, but you'll get 5 more corpses after that. So I think that this is, a very interesting card that gives survivability to a deck that is not necessarily triple blood. Being able to get the sort of vampiric blood effect without the card draw and with only 5 health instead of 10. But it is on something that is actually generating the corpses itself and can give you that sort of longevity for a deck that is looking for exactly that. So I think this card is fantastic, and also the fact that it's basically undead American Gothic is just the icing on the cake. Next up, we have Harrowing Ox. 7 cost, 7/7 taunt with Battlecry. If you've excavated twice, your next card this turn costs 7 less. So this is sort of free, right? If you're playing a deck that is playing a significant amount of excavation, and you could potentially on turn 7 play like Ox into other big thing. It's an interesting card. It is. I do think that, like, the fact that it doesn't itself have a discount, you have to have other things that you are playing with it, does make it a little bit more difficult. It feels in order to actually utilize this effectively. It is interestingly a frost card. Doesn't necessarily feel frost to me, but I guess frost in this set is the rune that is associated specifically with excavation. But, like, this doesn't really fit into what the general frost game plan has historically been. I guess you could theoretically play triple frost and play like this into another one into Froststorm's Fury and just freeze your opponent's board with 2 7/7s and a 5/5. That's really powerful. But yeah, this could give you something that, like, you play. Maybe you're playing Excavate Climactic Necrotic Explosion, and you can play 2 taunts along with the Necrotic Explosion in the same turn. You could play 2 taunts alongside any other big thing too. It provides, like, a lot of dynamic options in your later turns, but obviously you need to get to the later turns, and those taunts need to matter. And next up, Reap What You Sow. This is a 3-cost spell, deal 3 damage, excavate a treasure. This feels like okay. Obviously, 3 for 3 is pretty poor efficiency. Typically these days we see 2 for 3. It does go face, so that can matter, especially if you are playing Frost DK, which has a lot of things that can go face. But if you are playing a deck that does care about excavation, you probably care about excavating a lot, so you're going to want to play a lot of these. It is I think definitely going to be like an interesting balancing act of, like, do I just throw every excavate card into my deck? How valuable is it to get to those various breakpoints, and what is the level of efficiency that's worth it in order to get that? Because this is sort of draw card, right? This is kind of like a Hammer of Wrath in the sense that you are generating a resource. You're not going deeper into your deck, but you are getting yourself some extra resources alongside it. And then we have, this is another, I think, hilarious card, Farmhand. 3 costs, 4/3, Battlecry, discover an undead. With Quick Draw, it costs 2 less. So for those who may have missed the mechanics explanation from the original reveal, Quick Draw means that if this card entered your hand this turn, for those who are familiar with Magic the Gathering, it's very similar to the Miracle mechanic, which made things have a different cost or a different effect the turn that you drew them. In Hearthstone, it's not just rather if they were the first card you drew that turn. In Hearthstone, it's not that. It is if it's entered your hand this turn. So if you drew it, doesn't have to be the one card you drew in the turn, but if you drew this turn, or if you discovered this turn. So if it were possible, which it isn't, because cards that discover can no longer discover themselves as a game rule, essentially, you could farmhand discovering a farmhand, which would then cost 2 less. Farmhand, discover a farmhand, which obviously, again, you cannot do. But it's interesting because I think this as a 3 cost 4/3 with the discover is okay. It's pretty tempo negative because it trades down with a lot of stuff, and but it does generate a resource when you play it. So there's certainly something going on there. Being able to discover undead can mean that you can get additional copies of some pretty powerful stuff. But yeah, overall, I think this is probably one of the weaker cards, it seems, of the Death Knight selection. But the fact that it's literally a hand wearing a farmer's hat named Farmhand means that I'm gonna have to give it a pass and a thumbs up from me. So we don't have that many cards from that many sets. That's the last Death Knight card, except for the legendary, who's very cool. Reska, the Pit Boss. 20 cost with Rush. Costs 1 less for each minion that died this game. Note, not each minion that died under your control. This is quarter creeper text. This, in the spoilers, it was a sleeper. Yeah. So for each minion that died this game, not minion under your control. Minion, period. So obviously you do want to play this in a deck that has a lot of minions that it is generating and having, die. This is obviously something that can be very powerful alongside, the card that we mentioned earlier, I forget the name of it. Make 4 1/1s with Rush. Anything that, various death rattles that make more guys. One of the places that my brain immediately goes is to a Dead Air deck. Like if you're playing like a Dead Air plus Death Growl deck, that can easily get down cheap, and you can, steal your opponent's entire board by playing this, Death Growling, giving its Battle Cry to, or rather its Death Rattle to the stuff around it. Dead Air, steal all your stuff, get it back. I think that this is definitely a very, very cool card. As to whether it's actually a good card, certainly depends a great deal on the metagame. If the metagame is very minion oriented, in particular mid-range and large minion oriented, in the sort of mid to late game, I think this is a fantastic card. It's certainly very good against Titans. Being able to trade into something, steal a Titan, use its ability immediately, and again, the potential with stuff like Death Growl and Dead Air is pretty huge. But I think that it has the potential to be very strong in that kind of metagame. If the metagame looks anything like it does right now, with ramp OTK, very fast, disruption, secret rogue style decks and things like that, probably not a good card, right? But if there is, a shift in the metagame that has it much more minion based, then I think this has the potential to be very, very, very strong. But yeah, that is in fact our last Death Knight card. So we are going to keep going. As of recording, there are no revealed Demon Hunter cards yet. There are no revealed Druid cards yet. There are 2 revealed Hunter cards. We will start with Messenger Buzzard. This is 2 cost 1/2 Beast. With Death Rattle, draw a Beast. Give minions in your hand +1/+1. This is, I think, a pretty interesting card. There's some amount of hand buff-ish Hunter. This being hey, it dies, replaces itself. You can buff your stuff. You can use this alongside, say, Awaken Tremors. You can use Death Rattle to, trigger effects. You can use various minions with Rush, right? There's this alongside in a deck with Hollow Hound. The fact that it's just draw Beast too. There's also the Gorgon, right? The Gorgon that infuses to get Rush that cleaves is also another pretty powerful card. But this just being Battle Cry, or rather not Battle Cry, Death Rattle, replace itself plus, right? This dies. You draw a Beast specifically, so it could be used effectively as, a way to find specific cards in your deck, rather than just value that's replacing yourself. And then also buffs your hand, right? So because you're getting the hand buff effect, you're getting a lot more utility out of, again, things like the cleave effects, the lifesteal effects, the rush effects. You can, be using this in a Death Rattle deck to buff up eggs or something, though that's obviously pretty slow. But I think that being able to trigger this with the Yodeler, right? Speaking of which, you can trigger the Death Knight, Sylvanas clone with the Yodeler and just steal all their stuff. But yeah, I don't think this goes into obviously Arcane Hunter or Secret Hunter right now, and Beast Hunter has kind of fallen off the map since the most recent round of nerfs. But this is a card that could potentially be quite strong in those. Again, facilitating stuff like Hound and Gorgon and other similar things to being more powerful, as well as, giving you a little bit of card draw, which many Hunter decks could really use. All right, next up, we have a weird card. Feldurin the Lost. 4 cost 3/4. Battle Cry. If your deck has no duplicates, gain immune this turn and attack all enemies. So there are apparently a number of Highlander style cards. Highlander, for those who don't know, is a term that means a deck containing no more than one of any card. That name comes from Magic, which comes from the movie, The Highlander, with the sort of tagline, "There can be only one." So if you are, not a boomer like me, you might not know the sort of origin of some of these things, but Highlander, is the term that kind of has carried over to mean this: no duplicates, only one of anything. I mean, this is a like pretty powerful effect. This could just like go punch a bunch of stuff, clear an opposing board very easily. But you know, it is a big ask to play no duplicates in your deck. And someone in the chat right now said, sadly, there can be only one did not apply to the Highlander movies because there should have only been one of those. That is correct. I hear they're rebooting the Highlander franchise though. Maybe the future ones will be good. Anyway, this is a big ask, right? Like previously we had cards like Zephyrus, Reno. There was the Bran that gave you a King Crush for 7 mana. There were a lot of things that I think were much more powerful than this effect. This being like a board control effect, essentially is fine, but it's hard for me to like look at this and be like, I want to build my deck around this, right? Especially when there isn't additional support. There might be, but we didn't. There were no neutral cards that I recall seeing, at least in the swath that I looked at that were also Highlander style cards. So there's a very minor kind of like Highlander theme. That's not necessarily like enough to really support this being the reason you're playing it. And there's the additional factor that like if you play against Plague Death Knight, your Highlander cards may just do nothing, right? Because they just shuffle 2 plagues with the same name into your deck, and now they don't function. But yeah, I could certainly see maybe there's like hand buff style stuff this can work with. It does work with the previous card that we were just looking at. This little fellow, the buzzard. It doesn't just buff your beasts; it buffs all minions in your hand. So maybe you draw your one buzzard, and then you draw your Feldura in the Lost, and you're golden. But he's not a beast, so it can't draw him. It can buff him if you already have him. But yeah, it is hard for me to really pass much judgment on this without seeing more of the card pool because obviously, like, if there's additional incentive to be a Highlander deck, then maybe this has more support. But otherwise, I certainly wouldn't go Highlander just for this card. And these are the only 100 cards that have been revealed so far, so hard to judge there. But let's move on to the single Mage card we've seen, which is Blast Mage Minor. A 6-cost 4/4 with Battlecry, Excavate a Treasure. For each card in your hand, deal 1 damage to a random enemy. This has Goblin Blast Mage feel to it, which is probably why it's, a goblin with the name Blast Mage that has a similar effect to Goblin Blast Mage. But it's much more expensive. At 6 cost, this is like kind of like big, a big hand card, obviously. If there are more things that are also like, hey, you want to have a lot of cards in your hand, maybe this ends up being something that you is a theme in Mage in this expansion that you can, sort of support and want to use this. The fact that this is random enemy is both great because you can nuke your opponent down if they have no minions, but also potentially bad because you can accidentally nuke your opponent when you really want to kill their minions. So I'm curious. Obviously, the Excavate effects are great at keeping your hand size up. If you're playing things that have Excavate, then you're generating more effects and more cards that are going to be going into your hand, so you're more likely to have a higher hand size. But this is like not by itself a card that would justify like, hey, I want to try and build a deck that's, going to have a big hand. You definitely need more, and as the only Mage card, hard to really say. But moving along. So Priest, we have all the cards. So let's take a look at Injured Hauler. So those of you who are regular watchers of the stream and of my YouTube channel know that Overheal is the deck that I have played quite a bit. And this is a very powerful card for potentially for an Overheal deck. 3-cost 3/7. Battlecry, deal 4 damage to this. Overheal, deal 2 damage to all enemy minions. One of the things that Overheal decks definitely can struggle with, as they are generally fairly minion heavy, is just falling behind, right? If you don't get like a great draw that just kind of gets out ahead of your opponent, then, well, you're often in trouble because you don't really have great ways to come back. You could potentially play like Holy Nova, which is reasonable at like, enabling your other overkill stuff, but is not itself something that you're thrilled to have much of the time because it's not super efficient. This as like a body that you can use as a threat against control decks and isn't just going to sit in your hand like Holy Nova often does, and unless you're drawing cards off of like multiple clergy or whatever. Um, this can get difficult for them to kill. It's another reason to play like Flash Heal in the deck, because obviously this into Flash Heal is a 3/7 plus AOE your opponent's board for 4 mana. And finding more ways to make things like the Torrent and Flash Heal more appealing in the deck, because the single target stuff needs to be pretty valuable in order to have a full card slot on it to just generate one overkill effect. This starts to really help with that, right? Like having this alongside, say, Heartthrob and Hedonus or whatever. This is also great because if you have this and Hedonus, one of the issues that you often have is that, hey, they have a bunch of stuff, so I can't kill them with Hedonus. But with Injured Hauler, being able to like heal this to clear out a bunch of small things, then your Hedonus can actually go face and kill them. And yeah, the last thing I want to see is my opponent get this from Hidden Meaning. Next up, we have Thirsty Drifter, a 4/6 taunt, costs 1 less for each 1 cost card you've played this game. So there's a little bit of a 1 cost theme in Priest in this set. I mean, this is, anything with cost reduction that puts meaningful stats on the board is powerful, right? This is potentially 0 cost 4/6, right? Like if you're just playing a deck with a bunch of cheap stuff, 0 cost 4/6. And like, there's that's even not even looking at the fact that there's multiple cards that also generate additional ones. Like even just this for like 3 mana is super efficient, right? This for 2 mana, it doesn't have to be 0, right? I think this is interesting because this can be played in a deck that's just a bunch of cheap stuff that you're being aggressive with. One of the things that when I saw this, when I looked at it, I was like, oh, this is actually kind of interesting because you could theoretically play this in a Stars Align deck, right? Your Stars Align deck is just a bunch of 1-drops, and you play your 1-drops out, or and then you have Stars Align, which you draw this after Stars Align. It's like, all right, well, this is a cheap guy, right? Because I'd played out a couple of 1-drops before Stars Align, and then I can Stars Align, and I can Stars Align this into a 9-drop, right? So I think that this is both like potentially like I'm playing a 1-drop theme deck that is like trying to combo off with this, play a bunch of these for cheap or whatever, and playing the various things that care about other 1-drops in the card pool, or generate a bunch of additional 1-drops, or just play this in a deck that just have a lot of 1-cost stuff, right? Like 1-drop minions. I think that's actually the dynamic is interesting. Maybe put this in a Astral Automaton deck. It can be a cheap thing you can play alongside your Astral Automatons that you're trying to copy and reanimate, that doesn't soak up the animate dead slot instead of those. Next up, Benevolent Banker. 3 cost 2/4. Battlecry, discover a spell from your deck. Quick draw enemy deck instead. So this is interesting because like it's obviously not super efficient. It's a 3 cost 2/4. Which is medium at best. But this is, basically a I'm forgetting what is it? Thrive the Shadows. My brain initially went to Shadow Visions. I'm like, it's not Shadow Vision. It's not making a copy of it. But yeah, it's basically Thrive on a Body, right? And if you're playing a deck that is like looking for specific combinations of spells, having both Thrive and this can be really powerful, right? Like maybe you're playing a deck that's looking to get you like there previously were, and you can't do it anymore because of the changes to Yogg-Saron. There was like a infinite fizzle Yogg deck, but being able to just find your snapshot or find whatever, I think is pretty cool. And the fact that there's the alternate ability of steal your opponent's cards, right? With quick draw, I do think that like the quick draw part is not likely to be super relevant most of the time. Although the fact that it can actually steal your opponent's card, right? It's discover. It's not discover a copy. It can take their card is a pretty big deal in some matchups, right? But it's something you can rely on. Like I wouldn't be playing this in say like a Thief Priest type deck because you can't just be guaranteed to play this on the turn that you draw it with quick draw. Although maybe you do want to play it in a Thief Priest deck because it helps you find identity theft or other key cards like that. So I don't know. You could theoretically, I think, put this into ETC, and anytime you ETC, you always get the quick draw effect because it's added to your hand that turn, I believe is how it would work. So you could have this in like ETC and be guaranteed to just steal a spell from their deck, which is kind of funny against like combo decks that rely on spells. That's a kind of interesting idea that I hadn't really given much thought to until now. So that's neat. So maybe there's more to this card than I thought, but it's pretty cool, and I do think this is one of the more interesting priest cards in the expansion. Next up, we have Holy Springwater. 2 cost, restore 8 health to a damaged character. Save any excess in a 1 cost bottle. So this is obviously a card that could be good in an overheal style deck. 2 cost for 8. The issue being that it is damaged character. My understanding is that specifically the reason this is damaged character is so that you can't just cast it on yourself on turn 2 and just get a 1 cost version of it. So that you can't. And the 1 cost version is basically just the remaining health to any character. That one doesn't need it to be a damaged character. But this is interesting because it's effectively 2 heal spells in 1 card, which can be very valuable for decks that care about healing specifically, like Overheal. The fact that it does require the thing to be damaged does mean that you're going to need to have things like the damaged Hauler or Hadronis to be able to Hadronis. I always say Hadronis. Hadronis in order to have a good opportunity to have it actually go off. Obviously, you can just get hit in the face, against aggressive decks, but it can potentially rot in your hand, which is one of the problems with a lot of priest cards in the past because they were so situational. Next up, we have Posse Possession. 4-cost spell, summon a 4/4 copy of a random minion in your opponent's hand. This is an interesting one because it's a 4-cost 4/4 all the time, but obviously hitting something like, I don't know, a Colossal or a Titan can be really wildly powerful, and popularity of those minions is obviously pretty high. So this is a weird one, right? Like, it is a card that is very contingent on like the metagame. It's probably not something that I can imagine going into decks very frequently. Like, if the metagame is full of like big death rattle minions, titans, huge stuff like that, then sure, I can see playing this. But you really need things to have like, big passive effects that don't just care about their stats in order to actually justify playing this in your deck. My guess is it's most likely going to end up showing up mostly from discover effects. Next up is Swarm of Light Bugs. 5-cost spell, summon 10 1/1 light bugs with life steal. Save any excess in a 1-cost bottle. So yeah, this is obviously you can't summon 10. So if you summon this, if you play this on an empty board, you're going to get 7 1/1 life steal minions, and then a 1-cost spell that will summon 3 life steal minions. So this is an interesting card. There's not like mass buffs really in Priest, so this feels like there's not a ton to do with it. But I mean, a ton of lifesteal minions specifically is kind of interesting because a lot of more aggressive decks may struggle to clear them all. You have like Cathedral. We have a lot of targets for Cathedral if you're playing this. It obviously can work with the stuff that does care about 1-cost spells or 1-cost cards, like being able to get like a bunch in a bottle and then copy that bottle with. Well, let's just get to it. This card, Pip the Potent. 4-cost 3/5 battlecry. Copy each 1-cost card in your hand. So this obviously can be used alongside the bottle cards that are giving you powered up things that you can cast for 1. Also very powerful. Just copying like any 1-cost thing that's good. Getting extra Shard of the Narus, getting extra Light It Burns, getting extra Astral Automatons, getting extra Clerics, Clergy, whatever. I think it's just a really interesting card that can push you in an interesting direction for deck building. This obviously would be going into the same deck as the taunt costs less for 1-cost spells played. But yeah, I think it's interesting. Get extra animate deads for your like Astral Automaton deck. It could even just go into like Shadow Priest with a bunch of 1-drops. Probably not necessarily good there because you want to be playing those out for tempo. But yeah, definitely a very interesting card that is something that I'm excited to experiment with. One of the funny things is that there are no actual 1-cost spells in this expansion, by the way. No 1-cost cards for Priest. There are cards that generate 1-cost cards, but none of the cards are 1-cost themselves. Next up, we have Tram Heist, 4-cost common card. Get a copy of each card your opponent played last turn. So this is interesting. This is, very expensive for like what it does. It's basically a plagiarize, but a plagiarize that you can like choose when to play. It feels like it's just too expensive for what it is, right? You're gonna want to play this like generally on turns your opponent's played like multiple things that are potentially strong, but then you don't have mana left over to play them, and you can't use like you could use this alongside like Harvester of Envy, but your opponent's already played those cards, so they'd have to be like minions that you then like play this, play Harvester, play the thing they played, and it's just like that's just so much mana. This is obviously is at its best alongside like Mysterious Visitor, but even then, like it's already just so much mana up front to cast that it feels very difficult to make it work. I was hoping for more like Thief Priest type cards because I think Thief Priest is a very fun deck. But this I think is just kind of not it. So next up we have Invasive Shadeleaf, another in the bottle cycle. This is deal 8 damage to an enemy minion for 4. Save any excess in a 1-cost bottle. So this is, I think, probably the most interesting. I guess not most interesting, but probably the most powerful of the bottle cycle in my mind, because like this is just 2 removal spells, right? Like this can be 5 mana kill 2 creatures as long as they're not like both big, or like 4 mana kill your like big thing, and then 1 mana like 1 to save for later, right? Like I think this is just a pretty powerful card efficiency wise. That said, like I don't know that Priest is really in the world where like their big concern is card economy, because like they just have a ton of resource generation, a ton of card draw. Well, not really card draw, but resource generation. It is a shadow spell, so like it can come off of the visions. It can be played in like a Benedictus deck. We haven't really seen any meaningful stuff to play like a control Benedictus style deck, but it's something that's worth keeping in mind. But there is already like Cannibalize. You're playing a control deck, so the fact that this like you really have to care about like the fact that you're getting multiple kills, right? Like you have to care about the again like the card economy rather than like just necessarily the efficiency of the effect. And there isn't much that this doesn't kill, but if there's ever a situation where you do really need to kill something and this doesn't do it, you're gonna be sad that it's not a Cannibalize, I think. But it's interesting, and I think it's worth experimenting with. But last but not least, we have Elise, Badlands Savior. So Elise is another Highlander style card, but again, like we've only seen one in Hunter. Now we see the one in Priest, which is 8-cost 5/5. Battlecry. If your deck has no duplicates, summon 4/4 copies of 4 random minions in your deck. So this effect is really powerful. Like if this hits a Titan, if this hits a Colossus, if this hits a Death Rattle minion, if this hits anything with like a passive style effect, it's extremely strong, right? Like any of those things. The problem is, it's a Highlander card. So it's very difficult to build your deck in a way that's like only good hits for Elise, or at least mostly good hits for Elise, when you can only play 1 copy of anything. The Highlander cards do get better the bigger a format gets. Having these introduced sort of the end of the year now, as opposed to early in the year, does mean they're going to start off being more powerful because there's just more cards, right? There's more high quality cards. I mean, like when we see things like, why do you play this over Cannibalize? It's like, well, maybe you're not playing it over Cannibalize. Maybe you're playing them both because you're playing a Highlander deck with Elise. So it is worth thinking about cards in that context as well. But yeah, I think there's a lot of very, very strong hits for this. As to whether like that's like a deck strategy, like how are you actually winning with this deck, right? Like just having, being a Highlander deck just for Elise, is that worth it compared to just being a more consistent controlling style deck that can just, win in the way that Control Priest has won for a long time now with card advantage from Creation Protocol, identity theft and things like that. I was gonna say thought steal. It's been a long time since thought steal. But it's a very cool card, and I'm definitely gonna experiment with it, this. It's two of my things I love. It is Priest and Highlander cards, two of my favorite flavors, all mashed together. It's beautiful. But as to whether it's actually going to be competitive, my guess is no. But we do still have, I believe, one neutral legendary that has not yet been revealed. Maybe that's another Highlander support card. We'll see. All right, moving along. We have no rogue cards revealed as of yet, so we can skip that. We can go to Shaman. There are only two Shaman cards we've seen so far. One of them is Living Prairie. It's a 5-cost, 5/4 elemental. With Battlecry, if you played an elemental last turn, summon 2 3/3 cows with Rush. So first of all, it summons cows with Rush, which is great. But there are a number of cards in this set that suggest that there's elemental synergy stuff coming back. This being, of course, one of them. As of now, again, as the filming of this, we haven't seen any of the other Shaman cards outside of the one other one, which is just a spell. But A, I love the fact that this summons cows with Rush. I think that's hilarious. But B, this is just a powerful effect, right? You're getting, a 5/4 and 2 3/3 Rush minions for 5. That's a lot, right? There's a reasonable, reasonable with a grain of salt, reasonable neutral shell even prior to this for some amount of elemental stuff. The Flame Revenant that gives the elementals you play +1/+1 is quite powerful. Although in the current metagame, pre-nerf, those decks just get absolutely wiped out by Prison Breaker, which is one of the reasons that I'm pretty happy to see the Prison Breaker nerf. I think that we'll certainly need to see some strong Shaman elementals in order to actually support this, but this, if there is a shell there, feels very strong to me. Next up, and our last Shaman card so far, is Dehydrate. 3-cost life steal spell, deal 4 damage to a minion. So basically Tidal Surge, but quick draw costs 1. This is just a pretty strong card, right? It doesn't have a spell type, which can certainly be relevant. It's not like a nature spell like Tidal Surge, I believe was. And the spell types are certainly very relevant for things like Flash of Lightning and Lightning Reflexes right now. It's probably good that it is not a nature spell, because it would be absolutely busted just getting this off of Lightning Reflexes and be able to play it for 1. So I'm glad that didn't happen. It is very easy to be very sad for this poor toad or frog or whatever who's clearly thirsting and can't quite get to the water. It's tragic. But yeah, overall, just I think a solid-ish removal spell. Very good with Mellowmania. For those who have been following my Mellowmania Shaman adventures, this, getting this off of Mellowmania means 1-cost, deal 4 damage, because the quick draw counts when it is added to your hand, even if you don't draw it. So I think that is probably where I'm most likely to see that is, getting it off of a Saxophone Soloist Mellowmania. Let's go. All right, well, that's the last of the Shaman cards that we have seen so far. I believe we're going to be seeing more in the very near future. But we have one Warlock card, which is this, Trolley Problem. First of all, the philosophy student in me loves the fact that there's a card literally called Trolley Problem. And it shows the two different people on the tracks. But yeah, discard your lowest cost spell, summon 2 3/3 tram cars with Rush. Quick draw, don't discard. So yeah, this is, it's also funny that it's the Trolley Problem. You actually get 2 cars anyway, right? You're actually going to get 2 of them. So you're not going to miss one of them. The Trolley Problem is solved, folks. With this card, you don't have to decide who to hit. You get to hit them both. But yeah, there's obviously some degree of like discard synergy stuff. It is specifically discard your lowest cost spell. So if you're playing a relatively limited number of spells, you can you use this with like Suffocating Shadows and kill an opposing minion. You can use it with the Shadow Barrage and nuke your opponent's stuff. And it's an interesting design puzzle because of that, right? Like you can look at building your deck with specifically a set of stuff that this works with, and there's also some interesting neutral cards that can feed into this as well. Speaking of neutrals, that's where we're at. That's the end of Warlock. We haven't seen any Warrior, so it is time to check out the neutral cards. First off, we have Sheriff Barrel Brim. 4 cost 4/4 with Battlecry. If you have 20 or less health, open the Badlands Jail. I realize they don't have the Badlands Jail image for you, but is a location that turns a minion dormant for 3 turns. So it's basically the jailer, right? We had, what's her name? Maiev. So this is if you have 20 or less life, you get a location that can Maiev people and send them dormant for 3 turns. So it's fine. The Maiev was never actually good. It was one of the most overhyped and under-delivering cards in any set. But this getting a location that can do it repeatedly is pretty interesting. The fact that you need to have 20 or less health is an interesting caveat. It can be used in a deck like Warlock that is using its life total as a resource. That's probably where this feels like it's most likely to find a home, is in a deck that is able to accelerate to the condition, like a self-damage Warlock style deck. I can actually see this being pretty interesting there. Although it does take up 2 spots on the board, and the self-damage Warlock style decks tend to flood a bit. But overall, I think it is a card that is probably not going to see like a ton of play because of that condition. It's difficult to like be meaningful in the early turns of the game, and does require a metagame where like having the ability to set a minion dormant is relevant, which basically requires a metagame that is like more mid-range and large minion focused. Next up, Sunspot Dragon. 6/6 tradable lifesteal with quick draw deals 6 damage. The combination of tradable and quick draw is very interesting because it's like, oh, this isn't online. Well, I'll send it back. I'll send it back. I'll send it back. Boom! Here it is. Get you for 6, heal 6. I have played a number of dragon decks in my time, and this is a pretty a pretty solid card. Assuming you can, it's a very solid card. Assuming you can activate the quick draw. By itself, it's okay. If there's any particular like dragon themed stuff, having the ability to have just a big lifesteal minion can be valuable, because when you're playing a deck that's just like playing stuff to the board, if you do fall behind, having like the ability to get your life total back up can be a really big deal. But yeah, tradable is really the key to this card, because in the instances where it's not great, then you just send it back. And the quick draw of 6 damage lifesteal plus the body is a really, really effective combination. Next, we have Dry Scale Deputy. Battlecry, the next time you draw a spell, get a copy of it. This is, I think, particularly interesting with dredge effects, where you have some control over the ability to get specific cards, or just the ability to like identify. I guess it's mostly dredge, right? Like that's the only thing I can think of that like sets your draws right now. But being able to use this alongside like aquatic form or gone fishing does feel like it can create some pretty interesting stuff to me, especially alongside any kind of cost reduction stuff, right? Like say you use this in like a warrior deck with From the Depths, and you're like, hey, look, I From the Depths into a discounted copy of this, and they get another one, and ta-da. You play this in like the one spell warrior deck, right? You cast this on turn 2, you play Steam Elemental on turn 3, and you get 2 black rock and rolls, and then you just make your deck enormous. Use this to illuminate. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that this has synergy with. So I think it's a pretty interesting card. I think with outside of those effects, it's probably unlikely to be good. But I think that there's a lot of interesting ways to try and use that. Next up, Burrow Buster. 5 cost, 6/4 rush. Battlecry, Excavate a Treasure. This is, if you're playing like an Excavate deck, maybe this is okay. 5 cost, 6/4 rush is only really good if there is like a mid-range minion format where like this trading with their guy is and getting a little bit of value is relevant. It is a mech, so maybe this goes into some sort of mech deck. Like mech mage, probably not though. It's like it's too expensive for most of the like mech style decks. They mostly want to be playing cheap stuff and maybe magnetizing to them, and there isn't that much overlap between excavate and magnetize that I have seen so far, at least. Next up, Gold Panner. 2 cost 1/2 at the end of your turn, draw a card. I mean, this is like a peasant that automatically gets his job done, right? Like I think that this is actually a fine card in some strategies where like you just want to cycle through your deck, right? It is, kind of similar to just like you can't just like churn through like a combo deck like with Novice Engineer, right? Like you draw this, you have to wait, right? So, it doesn't have a minion type either, so it's just fine, right? Like I think it's just a fine card in a lot of circumstances, which is probably not good enough to actually see play. But if you are playing a deck that's like, is playing minions and is a little bit like, starved for card draw, maybe it's okay. Next up we have Cold Miner, 2 cost 1/1 Battlecry Excavated Treasure. If there are, decks that care about excavating, the simplest, cheapest version of this is probably something that sees play, right? If you're playing a deck that like does care a lot about like trying to go excavating, whether it's like to return your pile of bones, or if you're one of the classes looking for like the legendary treasures that you can excavate. I think this is, a card that is likely to see play in those decks, just because, again, it is a straightforward, cheap version of the core effect that your deck is looking for. Next up, we have Kingpin Pud. Good stats for his cost, 6 cost 6/7. Battlecry, resurrect your Ogre Gang, give them Wind Fury. So that, of course, requires us to understand what are in the Ogre Gang, which I don't have an easy way to search for them in this list of stuff, so I'll just click through and hope I find them. This guy. Haha, Ogre Gang Ace. 5 cost, 5/4 Rush. Whenever this attacks, gain Divine Shield, 50% chance to gain Life Steal instead. So, I mean, it is interesting, right? Like, this like, a 5/4 Rush Divine Shield for 5, not bad, right? It's actually okay. But when you want Divine Shield and you get Life Steal, that sucks, right? You're trying to like value trade into a similar cost minion, and you're at full health. That's unfortunate, right? You definitely don't want that. So that's a similar theme that I think we find in the Ogre Gang. Is this another Ogre Gang? No, just kidding. Ignore this. Where's another Ogre Gang? I'm trying to look at tiny thumbnail images in this directory. Maybe I should make my thumbnail images bigger. Extra large icons. There we go. Haha! We have the technology. All right, next up we have the Ogre Gang Outlaw. 3 cost 4/4 Rush with a 50% chance to attack the wrong enemy. I mean, 4/4 Rush for 3 is like insanely strong. And frankly, like you can only go so bad attacking the wrong enemy. You can hit their face. It's not terrible, right? It's actually okay. You're getting very good stats for the cost, as is the theme of ogres. So I could maybe see you actually playing that. Yeah, 50% chance to have charge on turn 3. You either attack their minion or you get their face. Let's go. Speaking of, Ogre Gang Rider. 4 cost 3/6 Rush. 50% chance to give your hero +3 attack this turn instead of attacking. This one's kind of funny. You're like, okay, I want to value trade into that. No. Basically, similarly, 50% chance to go face. So yeah, the Ogre Gang theme is pretty fun. And frankly, I think if you do play a bunch of Ogre Gangs alongside Kingpin Pud, and you just get all your Ogre Gang back alongside a 6 cost 6/7, talk about good stats for the cost, right? You get a 4/4 for 3, a 3/6 for 4, and then boom, and 5/4 for 5, and then this. Talk about a curve, right? That is good stats for the cost. All right, next, Miracle Salesman. 1 cost 2/2. Death Rattle, get a tradable snake oil. I actually don't know what the snake oil does, but the fact that it's tradable means it is kind of like a 1 cost 2/2 that draws a card, right? Like this doesn't have a minion type, but it's just a 1 cost 2/2. It is apparently a 0 mana spell that does nothing. That's actually great, but it's tradable. So the fact that it's tradable, first of all, I love that thematically, right? You literally have something that does nothing. Other than potentially, trigger spell synergies, discount things that care about spells. Works with spell damage, I guess. But also just like, this guy dies, and it's just like, okay, I have a one cost thing that draws a card. Yeah, you may have to redraw it later and play it again, but it's actually like not a bad deal. And again, it's attached to a 1 cost 2/2, which is not a bad deal either. Next up, we have Bounty Board, which is kind of funny. 3 cost 0/5. Your Excavate, Quick Draw, tradable, and legendary cards cost 1 less. I mean, this is like kind of wild, right? Like this, if this does stay in play, it's pretty strong, right? Like you're getting it's basically like potentially additional mana. It is, however, a 0/5. So it's just gonna kind of die, right? If you have somebody like protect this, probably not worth, right? You need to actually have like significant amount of excavate stuff. Like you need to be getting like a piece of everything here, right? You need to be like excavating, being able to play like the one costs for 0 to get like meaningful tempo, and then like playing out your legendary things cheaper. Maybe, yeah, maybe this is like something which is like good in like a very excavate heavy deck because they also have legendary things that care about excavating. I don't know. It's probably not good just because it is like unless you're immediately getting basically 3 mana worth of tempo from it, it's probably gonna die, and then it's probably not, it's probably not gonna matter. It does like soak up some damage and maybe give you like a discount in a future turn if it does survive, but it's hard for that to be good. All right, next up, Horseshoe Slinger, a 3-cost 2/2 mech. Battlecry, deal 2 damage to a random enemy minion, quick draw, and one of its neighbors. I think this is cool. If there's like a bunch of small, like a metagame that has just a bunch of small minions around, stay 3-cost mech. You have to care about mech synergies for this to be good, I think. Yeah, probably just too bad. It's neat though. I love that it's a quick draw robot. Feels very much like an arena card. Next up, Dang Blasted Elemental. 4-cost 3/3 taunt with Death Rattle, deal 2 damage to all minions except friendly elementals. I was talking a little bit about the elemental package that does exist. This feels like it is a very reasonable, like, elemental in your way, right? Like this is like in a minion metagame. This does actually feel pretty powerful, right? Because your opponent has to kill it. If they're attacking into it with a minion, then you're just like AoEing them. You really obviously need to get value out of the Death Rattle in order for this to matter, because a 4-cost 3/3 taunt is absolute trash. But if there is a metagame where like that effect, like the 2 damage AoE, is likely to be relevant, I think this is a very powerful card. And specifically, one of the interesting things is there's a lot of like elemental discover effects. So you can discover this in a game where it is going to be relevant and without even actually putting it in your deck. Next we have Gattlesnake. And in return, load 2 bullets that deal 1 damage each. Death Rattle, fire at random enemies. Okay, this is my first time actually seeing this card, which is hilarious. So if this like survives, he just loads up his gat over the course of the game. I don't think this is a good card, but this is a hilarious card. Like this, I love it, even if I'm never gonna play it. Next up, we have How to Fan. 2-cost 2/3 Murloc. Whenever your hand has less than 3 cards in it, get a random Murloc. This card I actually think is very powerful. Like, it is basically if you're playing a deck that like plays everything out, you're just like you can just keep playing things out. This isn't like once per turn. This is ever, right? Like you play you have 0 cards, you draw this, you play it, you immediately get 3 random Murlocs because your hand has fewer than 3 cards until it has 3 cards. You play a Murloc, you get another one. You play a Murloc, you get another one. You play a Murloc, you get another one. I think this is actually like very likely to be good, and I could see this being like a card that almost single-handedly makes like a like Murloc aggressive deck a reasonably viable option because they will not run out of gas with How Defend. So maybe like Murloc, like with all the dredge stuff in Warlock and everything, is actually a reasonable thing. I could maybe see like an amalgam, like a menagerie deck that uses this as like a reload. That it's just like it's hey, it's a Murloc. My deck doesn't have Murlocs, but when I like unload, boom, and this can give you amalgam. This can give you this can give you 1 amalgam band, right? I think this is a very very powerful card. Next up, we have Trapdoor Spider, a 2-cost 1/2 stealth poisonous. After your opponent plays a minion, attack it. This feels like an exceedingly powerful arena card and not a very good standard card. Like I think this effect is, when you can expect your opponent's primary game plan in the middle to late turns of the game to be play a minion, then this is a great card, right? Like you can make it so they can't play a big thing against you because it's gonna get eaten by your spider. But if you're playing a metagame where like they have other options or they have like little things like that they can play more easily, feels like it's pretty bad. All right, next we have Rowdy Partner, a 4-cost 4/3 battlecry. If you're holding another 4-cost card, deal 4 damage. This card would be extremely powerful in classic set Paladin because all their good cards cost 4. Mostly just feels like an arena card to me. Even if this was just 4-cost 4/3 deal 4, I don't think this would be a card that I'm excited about for standard. Next up we have Cattle Rustler, 5-cost 3/4 battlecry. Draw a beast. It costs 3 less. Like I could see this maybe being a deck that has like several just giant beasts, and those are the only beasts in the deck. All right, like this drawing you like a 9 or 10 cost beast, like Ozumat or King Crush or whatever. Maybe this ends up being good there, but like you need to be able to play like a giant thing that is worth playing absolute garbage on turn 5. Like if you have like a colossal, like this being able to like draw say like Behemoth, in Priest or like Ozumat or something else, I think it definitely has the potential to be strong. But I think that like you need to be able to play a deck that like literally has like 2 or 3 giant beasts that you can draw with this and then play early, and those have a massive impact. And again, something like Behemoth or Ozumat or King Crush, even King Crush, just like playing like spending 5 on this guy and then be able to play a King Crush the following turn is only okay because you spent 5 on this guy and you're likely behind. You need the King Crush to like just win the game on its own. So maybe you play this with like other sort of like weird combos, like this like tutors a combo card for your deck. Like it tutors like the 2/5 Kraken that you can play for 0 to like have some crazy death rattle combo, something like that. Anything that is a tutor effect and or has cost reduction are things you need to keep your eye on. This has both, right? So this has the ability to find exactly the card you want and reduces cost. So it is definitely even if it might not necessarily seem like a powerhouse, it's definitely a card that is important to keep in mind when you're looking at a card in the future. Like for instance, this Cattle Rustler up a Thunderbringer. Maybe your deck is just Thunderbringer, like Colossal, and I don't know, Ragnaros, right? And you're like, all right, well, I rustle up my Thunderbringer, I play my Thunderbringer, and now like you kill my, I like, somehow copy my Thunderbringer, put more Thunderbringers in my deck, and then I just have a loop of Thunderbringers. I don't know. There's not like still the guy who like makes copies of beasts, right? You can't like shuffle a bunch of Thunderbringers in your deck. The only way I can think of Thunderbringer working really powerfully, like, is with like the guy who gives you a 4/4 copy of a card in your deck. You need to like somehow get like more of them, so you can just keep making more and more of them. But maybe there's a way. Maybe there's a way. All right, we already looked at the Ogre Gang Ace. We're gonna bring it back. We're gonna get some good stats for the cost and just keep getting more good stats for the cost. But next up we have Saloon Brewmaster. 2-cost 2/2. Return a friendly minion to your hand. Give it +2/+2. So this is basically a Pandaren Brewmaster, but also has a hand buff element to it, which I think makes it more interesting. I don't necessarily know that it's like oh, this is so much more powerful. It's power creep, because it's only a 2/2, right? But this gives you like say you play a, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like what's the name of the Whelpertinger, the thing that like summoned a copy of itself. Like if you actually had like a Whelpertinger, this would be actually like good with like a Whelpertinger, right? You have various ways to actually make the things actually really care about stats is kind of cool. Obviously, like just the Brewmaster effect is something we have a bunch of varieties of these days. So I think that this is more likely to if it does see play, it's in something that like really cares about the hand buff specifically. Next up, we have Whelp Wrangler, a 2-cost 2/3. At the end of your turn, get a 1/2 Whelp with Taunt. So we already saw like the one dragon that I talked about earlier. Like if there is like a deck that cares about dragons, like especially if it cares about like how many dragons you have, this could be interesting because you just play it. Unless your opponent kills it, you get at least 2 dragons from this. It does put it into your hand, doesn't put it into play. Otherwise, it would basically just be necromancer with no corpse cost. But obviously, like you have to like care about having either dragons in your hand or a big hand in order for this to be like a card that's meaningful, or just like collecting a bunch of taunts, or maybe you just like dragons, you just want more of them. But I don't think this card is like likely to be particularly popular or powerful, but I do think that there are possible applications. Next up, we have Bunny Stomper. So this is the World Championship card from Bunny Hopper. 2 cost, 1/3 beasts. Your beasts have rush. I think this card is just very good. Just being able to give all of your beasts rush for 2 is extremely strong. There's lots of beasts that if you do give them rush, they're really powerful, right? And this is not like just a hunter card either, right? Like this plus Hydrolodon is just like clears all your opponent's stuff forever, right? This plus it is a 1/3 rush by itself. So I think it's just like this is a very good card. It's important to keep this in mind with like any beasts that do exist, any beast buff that exist, right? Like this alongside, even just this alongside like bananas, right? Like you can just like bunny stomper banana get your guy, but you can play this in like again like beasts outside of hunter. Hunter could pretty easily give stuff rush with like with kennels or whatever. They already had like Houndmaster Shaw. But this is much cheaper than Houndmaster Shaw, and itself gives itself rush, so it can be just a utility minion to kill your opponent's stuff, especially with buffs. So I just think this is a very, very strong card. Next up, Eroded Sentiment. 3 cost, 4/3 elemental. Battlecry, if you played an elemental last turn, discover an elemental from the past. So again, mentioned a little bit about how there is a decent amount of elemental sort of synergy stuff in this set. That we've seen so far, even. But yeah, this as a 4/3 for 3 is like medium, like kind of a bad stat line because it trades down. But like the fact that this can give you stuff from the past, right? Like you could get Kalamos if you're playing Shaman. You can get like Grumble. You can get Firefly, Servant of Kalamos. You can get Magma Rager. You can get Oko. He's a beast, not an elemental. But yeah, there's all sorts of cool stuff you can get with this. But also just like even outside of like the specifics, like of the older cards that you can actually discover with this, it's just a good value card, right? Like this is actually something that's like, okay, I'm just gonna keep getting more elemental chain going because I keep just getting more elementals that I can play along the way. So if there are things that do care about elementals, and spoiler, there are, then I think this is a very reasonable card, even outside of the just like neat part of getting stuff from the past. And speaking of, Azurite Giant. This is an 8 cost 8/8 elemental. Costs 1 less for each turn in a row you've played an elemental. I'm curious how this works exactly, because basically all of the other giants are things that track throughout the game, and I wonder if this is like costs 1 less for like up to the most number of turns that you've played a giant in a row this game, or if it's like costs 1 less for each turn in a row you've played an elemental to this point, right? Like if you don't play an elemental at some point like turn 6, but you played an elemental turns 1 through 5, is this discounted or not? Which is unclear to me from like how it's worded. It seems like maybe it breaks the chain and it goes back to costing 8, in which case like you are really incentivized to only play elementals. But like all the other giants work the other way, right? The text suggests to me that it would be based on your current streak, but like every other giant is like this game basically. So I don't know. It is unclear to me how exactly this works. My hope is that it is the most turns in a row that you've played an elemental, because again, otherwise it's like if you stop for anything, these are just dead cards, at that point. But yeah, this is the sort of card that I think would actually be very, very good in like Elemental Mage, for instance, where you're just like chaining stuff off. Because like I've been messing around with Elemental Mage. I feel like it's like okay. There is a lot of like powerful stuff there. I feel like it needs a little bit more. And this is the sort of thing that would give it like actually like a big oomph turn in the middle. One of the biggest issues that those sort of decks have is all your stuff, it ends up being pretty medium sized, pretty small to medium sized, and you just get absolutely wiped even by like a not particularly powered up much inventive creation or inquisitive creation. I always forget the name of that card. Or even just a current power prison breaker can kill your board in the mid game. Whereas like if you actually get to like Azurite giant people, it's like I have 8/8s. Those are a lot harder for you to kill. So I think it's cool, and I'm excited to hopefully try it out. Next, Cactus Rager, 5/1 poisonous for 2. It's one of the funny things about this card is that like a 2-drop with 5 power needs poisonous. It's like, what is it not killing at that point? But I love a new Rager. Let's go. Next up, we have Snake Oil Seller, a 4-cost 4/5 death metal. Summon 2 or shuffle 2 tradable snake oils into your opponent's deck. So this is like, the snake oil guy who gave you 1 tradable in your hand is cool. This one kind of disrupts your opponent and just makes them like a little bit less efficient because, it can disrupt Highlander cards, right? Like this by itself puts 2 cards with the same name in your opponent's deck. If they're playing a Highlander deck, no matter what class you're playing, this dies, you can disrupt it. And maybe you just like keep copying this and just give them endless snake oils. They are tradable, so they are not like just like kind of rotting there like the bad like Albatross was, but they do kind of mess up their efficiency in their turns. And this is a Naga, so it actually does have a minion type, so it has a little bit more application than a lot of neutrals would. But overall, I don't think it's a particularly strong card, but it is something that does have those applications at least. Next up, High Noon Duelist. Both players draw. Destroy the card that costs less. This card's funny. I love the fact that it's like uses the draw in like Wild West parlance, but it's probably not a good card. Like this is maybe you play this in like some sort of just like big deck where all your cards are huge and you're very likely to blow up your opponent's stuff. Like the fact that you can potentially nuke some of your opponent's like combo pieces win conditions is kind of neat. But it is it's not a particularly efficient minion itself, and it is a random effect, so you could very easily just blow up your own things. So yeah, probably not likely to be a card that really sees play, but I love the fact that it is literally a quick draw. You drew slower because your card was cheaper. It seems more like it would make more sense if you blew up the higher cost card, but that's probably a more frustrating thing because high cost cards are more likely to be central to people's strategies. Next up, Line Dance Partner. This is if you are in middle school in the 90s, you did this. That was like a weird thing. I don't know how many people out there listening were, in the United States in the 90s where like they just had like square dancing. It was just like a thing. There was like a unit in school where they'd have square dancing, which is apparently some weird like anti-rock and roll thing from like some, hyper religious guy or something like that. But anyway, 3-cost 3/2 battle cry. If you're holding another 3-cost card, summon a random 3-cost minion. This is fine, but yeah, it's you're playing a guy with a card with 2-cost stats to have a 3-cost in your hand to get another guy with 3-cost stats. Pretty mediocre. There is a whole theme of this though. There's another partner card right here, Greedy Partner. 2-cost 2/3. If you're holding another 2-cost card, get a coin. So this actually feels like it's maybe a reasonable one. This feels like the best of the partner cards, right? Because this, a coin is pretty universally useful. A 2-cost 2/3 has reasonable stats, and like imagine just playing this in like Rogue, right? Like you've got a bunch of 2-cost cards. You've got like Poison Belt. You've got Serrated Bone Spike. You've got the Ghoulish Alchemist, and coin is great in your deck, right? Like so this I actually think is a very very reasonable card that could show up in Miracle Rogue. Or a similar style of deck that just cares about playing a bunch of stuff quickly, which is, maybe Ramath Mage giving you, coins to be able to play late game stuff. Or maybe you're just playing a deck that wants to like ramp into something very specific at a certain time, and you happen to be able to enable this too. So next up we have Tram Mechanic, a 1-cost 2/1. Death Metal, get a Barrel of Sludge. So Barrel of Sludge, I actually don't have that available right now. Let me pull it up real quick, or at least for me, because I want to make sure I'm not getting it wrong. So yeah, the Barrel of Sludge. So the Barrel of Sludge is a 2-mana neutral fell spell. When this is played, discarded, or destroyed, deal 3 damage to the lowest health enemy. This is interesting because, like, it's just like, it's generating, like, it's a 1-cost 2/1 that generates potentially a removal spell, right? Um, the removal spell has a discard or destroy effect. So, like, you could play this with, say, the Trolley Problem in Warlock, or other sort of discard a spell things in Warlock. And you get a spell that you will then be able to discard, say to, again, Trolley Problem, or to the, like, what is it? The Dude of Sargeras, the 4-cost guy, that you can discard and, get value while satisfying your discard effects. So I think it's actually, this is like actually a pretty reasonable card. Like, it's also just, again, attached to a 1-cost 2/1, which isn't great, but it's fine. So it is kind of funny that the solution to the Trolley Problem is a trap mechanic who gives you some toxic waste. And next up we have Azurite Chain Gang. If the flavor text or voice line of this does not say something about how long this can go on, it's a tragedy. But it's a 4-cost 2/3 with Battle Cry and Quick Draw. Summon a copy of this. So yeah, this can go on even longer these days. I'm it is interesting because it's literally a power crept Serenite Chain Gang. It's Serenite Chain Gang reverted to not be summon a 2/3 taunt. Summons a copy, and it has Quick Draw. So this can theoretically be 3 2/3s for 4, which it can go on for a very long time then. And it also, if you happen to have various hand buffs of some kind, even more, right? You can play. There's like the Paladin hand buff thing. There's 2 different ones now. I mean, there's obviously the 2-cost now 2/2, who gives your hand +1/+1. There's also the Forge guy who gives your hand +1/+1 or +2/+2 if you forged it. So this could be actually a fairly sweet card with some specific applications, again, in decks that are capable of buffing your hand. And our final card. No, it isn't. It's not our final card. What are you talking about? You don't know anything. Gaslight Gatekeeper. Who is herself apparently a girl boss. So 3-cost 3/4 battle cry. Shuffle your hand into your deck and then draw that many cards. I didn't have that card. What are you talking about? There's no card in my hand. But yeah, so this is kind of a Finley. Obviously, it is not. It's different from Finley in the sense that it is shuffling your hand in, not putting in the bottom. So it doesn't work with Dredge. But it is essentially like redrawing your hand, right? So this is an interesting card, right? I think this is actually, like, in decks that like have a lot of shuffle in effects, can be powerful to be able to have access to those. It actually has a minion type. It's undead. I can't think of like specifically things that care about that other than maybe like there's like the symphonies and Warlock. But yeah, like there's not like things that care about how many cards you draw. Like this could maybe be good in like the Demon Hunter, not Demon Hunter, yeah, Demon Hunter decks that want to draw a bunch of cards, that care about how many cards you've drawn that turn. This, allows you to just shuffle your hand in, boom, trigger those. Yeah, you just gaslight your hand. This lets you, tell your hand, no, you weren't in my hand. You're in my deck. What are you talking about? But yeah, it's another way to like redraw. Say you're playing like a deck that cares about a very specific card. Like for instance, Plague DK, who's looking for Helia. You can have like 2 of these in your deck that like actually give you a meaningful body to play on curve right before you would play Helia. And it's like, okay, I don't have Helia. Well, just kidding, I did. What are you talking about? Of course I had Helia. But yeah, if something like the Warlock quest comes back, this is another plot twist for you. You can play plot twist and this in Wild Quest Warlock. Let's go. Despite what the name of that card would have you say, that is actually our final card for today's review. Obviously, a lot still to come, but overall, I am very excited for Showdown in the Badlands. I'm very excited for Showdown in the Badlands. A lot of very cool cards, very cool mechanics. I'm also, as mentioned previously, very excited about the upcoming balance changes because they mean these cards can actually be exciting rather than just saying, well, this doesn't matter because it just gets yogged. This doesn't matter because I just die so fast to, Prison Breaker aggro decks. This doesn't matter because, my opponents have 8 mana on turn 4 and I'm sitting there struggling and doing nothing. But yeah, overall, very, very cool. certainly think that the excavate mechanic is really neat, and the overall just like swath of stuff that we've seen seems to encourage some sweet new archetypes. And I'm already excited about trying to build like new corpse generation Death Knight decks, as well as just hoping we'll see some new sweet elementals for Elemental Mage. But yeah, thank you all very much for tuning in. Let me know what your thoughts are on both the balance changes and Showdown in the Badlands in the comments. You hope that anything else would be changed for the balance changes, and what upcoming classes are you most excited about? What do you think, Oko? I think he wins. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.